The fascination with light, I think, is something we overlook. We live with it, we have it. Most of our houses don't use light properly. They have too much contrast and not enough light in the right places. And most of our buildings have too much light in the wrong places, or they're too flat. Most of our buildings, our lit environments, are very boring the way we use light. It's there. Well, it's really, it's hard to shut it off sometimes. I do occasionally behave, not that often though. I do them strictly as pieces of art, but I do them knowing that, especially in a large building, that it can add to the green component of the building. I'm very conscious of green buildings. I want to make sure that when I do something like this, it takes advantage of all its opportunities to make that building more green. My work is sustainable big time in a couple different ways. One is it uses light so efficiently that you can cut out a huge chunk of light in any building that I do. Secondly, it makes people rethink the way they light large buildings. We have tended to light our buildings, overlight our buildings architecturally to make up for, let me rephrase that. We have tended to overlight our buildings architecturally to make them welcoming and just pump tons and tons of warm light in there without understanding that there are better choices out there. Better choices involving light art, or just art that's well lit. Rooms that aren't quite as punchy, but that can still be quite welcoming without having huge amounts of light in public spaces. And we also don't need to have our spaces to be all the same. I think if I can do nothing more with my work than to show that a darker space with something in it is a workable part of the built environment, it's going to go a long way to make our buildings greener. Sometimes it's one at a time. Really, or talks like this, to get people to understand that lighting does not have to be all the same. It shouldn't be all the same. In any scientific endeavor, I think quite often you need to pair engineering with artists, with people of different mindsets. I've given talks at say, PP&G to scientists, where I had 15 research scientists in one room talking about glass, and 15 art students in the same room. Not knowing that they think the same way, they problem solve the same way, and they should be talking to each other. A lot of architects are starting to understand that light can be used differently. They're trying to use it differently with green architecture and green buildings. What they don't understand is quite often they're creating spaces where the contrast is so great that in itself is uncomfortable for people. They've got great daylit spaces, but as you move farther and farther away from the daylight, the interior spaces get darker and less comfortable. Or you look back toward the daylight and you've got a contrast that is too great. So they have to learn again how to make these spaces, to move people through these spaces differently. What I liken it to is any museums that I go to that I like the best aren't the museums where you walk into broad room after broad room after broad room. They're museums where you turn corners and discover things. And I think we can make our buildings do something similar, both in our design, physical design of the buildings, but the way we use light to move people through the buildings. Yeah, it's a benefit to everybody that's there. It makes you feel better in a building if it's done like that. It also is another way to use light more efficiently, to save on your energy costs. And that's something we don't do enough of. Light used properly in a building can give you a place to go away for a brief bit of time in the course of a really stressful day. To have it all lit the same makes it harder to find a place to daydream. And I'm not talking daydream, there's 3 hours of lost time. I'm talking that brief moment when you can get out of yourself for a little while, ground yourself, feel good about yourself, and then come back to work. And I think a building where the light changes gives you more opportunities and more places where you can do that. When I start working on a project, I often have certain things in mind. I want to do something that has geometrics mixed with organic shapes. I have a certain color palette in mind. I have a certain direction, but I don't sketch it. I don't work on a computer. There's not any physics. Well, any physics involved isn't mine. I just simply start with light and glass. My assistants are cutting and shaping glass constantly. My palette is now hundreds of pieces of beautifully shaped and polished pieces of glass. Diamond cut, diamond tooled, diamond polished. And I use those to start with the white light and then gradually shape it and move it across the entire canvas. It's hard to really grasp the concept sometimes. Sometimes it's not, the feeling of, say, that a piece of light coming through Penn Station is not so much trying to grasp that piece of light, but knowing you want to create this contrast of light to shadow maybe in that case. And it might be something totally different when you finally do it, as far as color, as far as what it looks like, but you've captured the feeling of this contrast, this sense of motion in that space. And I think that's a lot of what I like to do, is to do something that moves like that. The main medium is really not the glass. The glass is simply a tool to get there. The main medium is the light. It's the way the glass allows me to, it's the tool I use to shape the light. But really, it's really equal parts those stainless steel brackets, the light, and the glass. The glass is the biggest part of making it work in terms of physically making objects in my studio. But the light itself is what I do. I'm a light artist, not a glass artist. Oh, it's a constant evolution. It's a constant evolution, one in terms of the materials we use to shape the glass, physically learning different grinding, cutting, shaping techniques, but also in terms of the palette. I am working with manufacturers constantly to find ways to get me, say, a new series of grays. I'm really excited about a new gray and mid-tone palette I'm developing. But that's going to be, 6 months, a year, year and a half, 2 years development time. We're adding pattern type reflective glass into what I'm doing. And we're adding new colors and new ways to use the colors, and that's just a constant slow and very, very expensive evolution. Sometimes they say this will be perfect for Stephen, I can't wait to show it to him. Other times they'll say to me, this is a really crappy piece of glass, can you use it? It was a mistake. And quite often that works equally well. Some of the neatest things I've worked with are pieces of glass that I didn't think would work initially. I've got a green that I really like that's too dark, too clunky, it doesn't make a statement. And I'm finding I can use that to really shape light in other ways where I don't want a solid piece, but it gives me a little bit of color, but it allows me to create shadows to move other things into. I'm working light and shadow, and it's all about light and shadow. If I can't create the shadows, the light doesn't show well. So a lot of what I do as I move light across the surface is create those shadows, create those places that light can happen, that color can happen. What you're not seeing here that's very difficult to show is that I'm actually creating underpainting, much like underpainting in a painting. If you block the light in many of my light paintings, you will still see extraordinary ranges of light and shadow under the blocked light because the reflected light is coming back in from a different angle. You can't see it that well. It's there, and it makes the color all the richer for it.